So why don't I limit myself to the Bible? Hey guys, it's John sitting here in my studio on a Sunday or just afternoon. And I wanted to hop on and make this video because I got a lot of people who are very Bible centric who ask me either why I look at other texts, or they'll tell me that I'm demonic because I mention Buddha or Krishna or any of the other spiritual avatars of old. You know, the Bible is a beautiful book, but the interesting thing about the Bible is when you look at it from a historical context, from just a literary context, and you start looking at it from the consistency of the information in the book, you very quickly discover that this book is so heavily flawed with multiple contradictory stories and false narratives and a lot of explanations that defeat its own message. But what's so interesting to me when I look at the Bible is there are beautiful truths within the Bible, and I love the beautiful truths that I find there. But for them to be validated or verified, you have to find those truths in other sources. And the Bible has become so incestuous since its origination in the fourth century, over 300 years after Joshua walked the earth, was when the Bible was finally compiled of a bunch of texts and put together. And those texts that they put together came from the 70 to 200 years after the crucifixion. So when you look at the Bible, you can't lean into the Bible as infallible or univocal because it is literally multiple voices from multiple ideologies and multiple theologies coming together and then judge which ones could fit into this book, which was finally compiled. And then that book has been manipulated and edited and changed, and various aspects of Christianity have different versions of it. It's a very convoluted idea that you can say the Bible as a singular book, because you can't, because the Bible itself is many different books and many different versions of books. But as I said, you can find beautiful truths in the Bible, and when you find those beautiful truths, you say, well, that feels right to me. It feels good to me. For me, when I look at the Bible, and I say this in many other videos, I put on my love goggles and I start reading the loving parts because I believe that God is love, like the book of John says. So because I look at the Bible from the perspective that God is love, then the parts that are not loving can't be of God. And as I look through the book using my love goggles, I see a beautiful simplicity of spirituality. Then I go over and I start reading the writings of Buddha. And what do I find? I find a beautiful simplicity. But I also find doctrines and dogmas and methods and techniques and all those things that Christianity has as well. Then I get into the Bhagavad Gita, and I find these beautiful messages of love and simplicity. But I also find the Brahman and the various definitions and labels and aspects of God, and the doctrines of man that become very complicated. Then I watch Star Wars, and I hear Yoda say amazingly beautiful things. And I watch Marvel movies, and Thor says something amazingly beautiful. I turn on America's Got Talent, and this woman who's on stage says something just stunningly beautiful. For me, when I look at the world in general and all of the various writings and media and all the stuff coming in, I find these beautiful sayings are being permeated throughout the entire society. And when I look at that, the wisdom of this broader perspective, looking at all of it as being of God and from God, I believe we're all one with God. And I believe this world that we're looking at is an illusion of belief in the image of God. I mean, God is showing us our ideologies, our beliefs in the image around us. That's why negative people see a negative world and positive people see a positive world, because it's a bigger and broader perspective. I was raised as a Catholic, and that's a very narrow perspective. And not only is it a very narrow perspective, it actually is a narrow perspective based upon theology that didn't happen until after the 4th century, and it has been adapted and moved upon ever since. A lot of the imagery of the devil and hell, that comes out of the Middle Ages. You know, we talk about the Holy Grail. Well, that's a mythological story from the medieval times. Someone sneezes, you say, "God bless you." Why do you say God bless you? Because back in the Middle Ages, they thought when you sneezed, you opened your soul to the devil. And the actual quote was, "May God bless you and the devil miss you." So these are all medieval mythologies that have been tied into this story of Christianity, but they weren't in the original text. They weren't in the original stories from the Greco-Roman Christians who wrote the Bible. And they weren't in the stories of Jeshua himself. These were things that were added over the course of time. And now, the modern New Age, they're adding like, oh, yeah, he went to France, he went to Scotland, he went to America. They start adding more and more stories to the story of Jeshua himself. So all of the books, the Buddha books, all of the ancient texts, all of them have stories and embellishments. In the Catholic Church, as I said, they kept adding theology. People talk in the Catholic Church about the Trinity. Trinity didn't come into play until the 3rd century. There was no Trinity, and it's not in the Bible, right? And the evangelicals talk about the rapture. It's not in the Bible. Money being the root of all evil is not the quote. It's the love of money is the root of many evils. That's the quote. It's so they misquote, they misrepresent the writings. And it's not just the Bible. So why do I not limit myself to the Bible? I believe, specifically from my past life regression, understanding that Jeshua was showing us our divinity. The religions, especially Catholicism or Christianity, they're very disempowering religions because they're telling you to be subjugated to an external God, and that the idea of you being one with God. In the Bible, it says that Jeshua said, "The Father and I are one, and you must become one with me as I am with the Father." He's talking about oneness with God, and he's saying that you should do it too, basically. And the Christian faith says no. He's saying he is God, and we have to bow down to him. But he washed his disciples' feet to say that he was no better than they. So once again, there's the devaluation of you as divine. And the reality of it is that everything all of the ancient teachers taught was that you have direct connection to the source. Now, why is the Bible valuable? I quote the Bible all the time. Why? I quote the parts that are loving, that are caring, that show your empowerment. I am. People say, "John, you seem so repetitive." I say, "Yeah, because the message is simple. The message is that you are divine, you are profound. And when you start looking at the present moment, the I am moment, the amen moment, amen means so be it, means right here, right now, it's done. That moment that you're dealing with is here. It's not in a book from 2,000 years ago. It's living in the now, in the present. So why would I contain myself to something that happened 2,000 years ago? You got to remember that all the books are stories about somebody else's spiritual experience. And they all told you to have your own. There's only one moment you're conscious. It's this present moment. So if you want to honor them, empower yourself in the now. And as the more you empower yourself in the now, you're actually doing what they all taught. The Bible talks about love and forgiveness and compassion and charity and doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so does Buddha. So does Krishna. These are all universal truths. Love is in all of them. Kindness is in all of them. Compassion and charity is in all of them. And when you look at this from the perspective of, if it's in all of them, why would I restrict myself to the Bible's doctrines alone? Because there are a lot of things in the Bible's doctrines that don't make sense, right? And Catholicism, especially over the years, have really kind of messed things up. It's during World War II, the Pope had a back channel to Adolf Hitler. And he knew that the Jews were being slaughtered, but what did he say? He says, just leave the Catholics alone. He didn't think about humanity as a whole. He thought only about that. So And I'm not trying to bash Christianity. I'm just saying none of it's perfect. None of it's perfect. But when you step into your power of following your own personal spiritual journey, and you start looking at all of them as coming from God in some form, but they're being filtered through the mind of man, you start to realize that the universal truths that you find in all of them is the message of God. It's the univocal message of God, but it's not limited to one text or the other. See, when someone tells you that the Bible is infallible and univocal, they're they're missing the point that God is not a religion. God is everything. And when you come to this idea of looking at everything and going in your world, listen to the child speak. My son, when he was 6, told me that God is in everything and everyone, and we control the God part inside of us. That's God speaking. That's God speaking. We control the God part inside of us. That's an understanding of a 6-year-old. Now, if I was Catholic or I was very Christian and I would not have listened to him as a message from God, I would have just said, well, isn't that cute? He must have picked that up somewhere. But in reality, he was just speaking from his oneness with the source, in my opinion. And so had I been in a funnel of one religion, I wouldn't have heard it because I was open to listening to everything from the idea of when I hear something, I feel it. Like if somebody says something, oh, that feels right. Well, the natural reaction is when you hear something that feels so true to you, you naturally go, oh, and you exhale. You release all the fears and anxieties that you're carrying because that simple truth, that simple love spoke to you and it made you release those fears and those anxieties. You got to remember that also all of the texts that you're looking at were written in a very specific time period. Dan McClellan talked about the story of Job, and he had these guests in his home who were supposedly angels, and people came to be with them. And now this is one of those texts that Christians use to combat homosexuality. They say that to be with them means to have sex with them. This is a modern interpretation. Basically, they came and said, bring them out of your house so we can see them, we can talk to them. The reason it gets interpreted as sex is because Job says, I can't be disrespectful to my guests. Take my daughter instead. Right? So he offers his daughter as a sexual tool for these people. The modern sensibility says, well, then obviously to be with them means have sex with them. And like Dan McClellan talks about the idea of the time period historically, it would have been a complete dishonor to Job had he not been a good host. And in that time period, women were the property of men. And so for Job to have these people interrupt his guests would have been a complete dishonor to Job for not being a good host. And so he offered his daughter instead of disrupting his guests. So the historical context of this is that Job did what he did to be a good host, not because of anything else. He was there as a good host because that's historically the context of the time, according to Dan McClellan, the Bible scholar. So when I look at this, it's like the context of the time is very, very important. I have an affinity for Shakespeare, and I have affinity for sword fighting, and I studied both. And there's in Romeo and Juliet, there's a line, Mercutio line, the immortal passato the punto reverso the hay. Nobody understands it unless you understand sword fighting. And you also have to understand that in the time period, Shakespeare was plagiarizing lines from George Silver's book, The Paradoxes of Defense, where he bashed all other forms of sword fighting. And the line, the immortal passato the punto reverso the hay, the passato and the punto reverso are fancy Italian sword fighting footwork. The hay is an Elizabethan jumping dance. That is a 3-part joke that basically says all you Italians are doing is just dancing around. And nobody would get that without the historical context of it. In Taming of the Shrew, Grumio says that Petruchio is 2 and 30 a pip out, Well, unless you understood that 2 and 30 was a dice game in the time, and a pip is a dot on a dice, and the 2 and a 30 pip at that time was a reference to being drunk. So without that understanding historically of the context. Now, Shakespeare was 500 years ago. The Bible's 2,000 years ago, and the Old Testament's 5,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago. So you're looking at a historical context that is not, that you cannot rely on in the modern age, because we don't necessarily fully understand all they're saying, all the original texts were saying. And then they were compiled in the 4th century and then have been, edited, adapted, manipulated for centuries. So there's no reason for us to actually say that it's univocal or infallible without understanding the historical context. Understanding the historical context means we can't take them as univocal or infallible. It has to be something that's we pull what we can from that makes sense to us. And then when you look at the writings of Buddha, it's the same situation. You look at the Bhagavad Gita, it's the same situation. You look at Deepak Chopra, you look at Wayne Dyer, you look at Eckhart Tolle. It's all the same situation. Things they say are in the context of the time. In 2,000 years, it may sound very strange to people what they're saying, right? And they'll be interpreting and manipulating. I can't tell you how many times I have had people tell me what I said or what I believed that had nothing to do with what I believed, but they're interpreting what they want and they're manipulating. So when I say I don't limit myself to the Bible, it's because I understand the Bible is heavily flawed, as are all the writings. But what I do is I look at all of them through those love goggles. And if it's loving and caring and does something nice to the world, that's what I incorporate into my personal truth. And I've been doing this for 25 years, and it's worked tremendously well. You have to also understand that all of the divisions that we're talking about within the Bible itself have led to just horrible conflict and division rather than unity. I mean, you look at the Native Americans here in North America. They were wiped out. Why were they wiped out? Because of Protestants escaping Catholics that were persecuting Protestants in Europe. So you're looking at these guys who have two different versions of the Bible. One of them says that their version is wrong and we need to wipe you out because you're all heretics for not believing as we do. So what happens to those people flee and then try to do the same thing to the Native Americans and wipe out the Native Americans. So it's really just, religion has, and these one-track mind religions have been so damaging to our world. When we all just look at the loving aspects of all the books and all the texts and all the ideas, and we come back to the space of going, oh, I can love that person. That Native American is a beautiful person because they have a different belief, and their belief takes care of the earth and takes care of their family. The one thing you'll find in all of them is that the number one thing that they all say they love is the most important to them all over the world is their family. Now, what is their family? It's the physical representation of love on the earth for them. They're literally saying the most important thing to them is love, and God is love. So it's a matter of living into that love, loving your family, loving your fellow man, loving the world, loving the earth, and being that aspect of love that is found in all the texts. Spiritual truth is not locked up in one religion, ideology, or doctrine. It's alive in the present moment. And in this live present moment, we can take this moment and be those teachings and understand there's a much broader scope to spirituality than one doctrine, one dogma, one lane. And, we can take our spiritual traditions, our natural experiences, our personal encounters with one another, and understand that God does not stop at the last page of Revelation. God does not stop there. God is found everywhere. Revelation is a really good example in historical context. And this is not just from my belief. This is what scholars say, that it was a contemporary piece written at the time to warn the churches about the persecution of Rome in the time. But there are ideas that these are prophecies of the now, and that has been so damaging to this world. But in reality, it's in the historical context, it was warning about the persecution of Rome in the time. Um, I mentioned earlier, I mentioned earlier the universal truths. Being in the present moment is found in all of them. Love is found in all of them. Kindness is found in all of them. And it's a matter of understanding that you can find these truths in diverse sources. You can find it in all kinds of places. And when you realize that you can find it in all kinds of places, that your connection of God deepens because now you understand that God is everything and everywhere. And you come to this understanding that when my 6-year-old says something beautiful like that, that's God talking. When you say the right thing to somebody else, that's God talking through you. When they say the right thing to you, that's God talking through them. When you choose to be loving to someone, that's you delivering God in the moment. You're the delivery method of God. It doesn't have to come through the religious doctrines or dogmas or theologies. It's a matter of just being loving. I leave you one commandment: love one another. That wipes out everything else. Because if you were truly loving one another, you wouldn't steal, you wouldn't kill, you wouldn't covet, you wouldn't take your parents' name in vain, or even God's name in vain, right? And God's name, according to Moses, is I am. So don't take that in vain. Say, okay, I am powerful. I am love. I am. You get to create from that place. By not limiting yourself, you'll feel closer to God than ever before. You'll be unlimited because God is unlimited, and the more unlimited you are, and the only way you become unlimited is to release the doctrines and dogmas. But the more unlimited you are, the closer you are to your authentic self, and the closer you are to your authentic self, the closer you are to experience God in the present. Love and the connection are central to the Bible, but it's also central to everything else that we did in the world, all the other writings as well. I know there's a lot of people who get very mad about this video because I'm saying the Bible isn't univocal. The Bible is definitely flawed in historical context. But think about that. I'm telling you to love one another. That's all I'm doing. That's all I'm doing. I'm telling you that we can love everybody in the world. When you look at that concept of loving everybody in the world, then you start to realize that doesn't mean love them only if they're Christian, or love them only if they're Hindu, or love them only if they're Muslim. It means love everyone. Love everyone. I often tell the story of going to Egypt and treated like a prince everywhere I went because I went there loving everyone. I didn't even think religion when I was there because I don't have a religion. I went there looking for positive experiences with lovely people, and I had them for a month, all traveling through Egypt. I ran into that other guy who went there as a Christian expecting problems from Muslims. He had a month of people wanting to fight him. And that's what they were looking for. And when someone says to me after seeing this video and they're going to, tell me that I'm going to burn in hell or whatever, this isn't about rejecting the Bible. This is about embracing a larger God that's too vast to be contained by any single book. It's about understanding that God is more than a book, more than a text. And I find that most Christians nowadays deify the book more than they deify the actions that God talks about in the book, about the love, the compassion. I was home for Christmas this couple weeks ago, and there's a section of my family that are devout Christian, and there's a section of my family that aren't. And we're in my brother's house, and they had the way his house is laid out. There was 2 separate rooms for dining for our dinner, and one room filled up with Catholics, and the other room filled up with everybody else. And my brother walked into one room and said, "How you Catholics doing?" He understood what was going on. The Catholics thought down of everybody else in the room, and so they sequestered themselves to a different room so they could hang out with themselves. It's been that way for years at Christmas. They don't embrace their brothers or sisters who don't believe exactly as they do, and that's okay. They're allowed to do that, right? But how much are they limited by their faith? How much have they cut themselves off from the rest of the family by their faith? Pretty heavily. They have literally sequestered themselves to a different room because they have to follow the doctrines and dogmas of that chosen religion. I was in the other room with amazingly cool people doing really fun things. And so we weren't judging them. They are the ones who sequestered themselves. They're the ones who divided themselves off to another room. And that's okay. But I'm not going to limit my experience. I went up and I spoke to them, and several of them, one of them actually gave me a cold shoulder, mainly because of what I believe. So that's okay. My only job is to live my truth. And my truth is to love everyone. And I went up and talked to all of them, and they were the ones who turned the other way. So to me, it's I'm going to love them unconditionally. If they need anything, I will hop in my truck and go. But it comes down to understanding that I'm not going to limit myself to that book like they've done. I'm going to open up to the broad spirituality of the world and take a moment to look at your own spiritual journey. Have you put yourself on a track that divides you, or are you looking at the world from a perspective of they're all one with me and all one with the covenant of God? I am in this brotherhood, sisterhood, this humanity of God, and God and I are one. And when you're looking at your experience in life, understand that God is too big and too beautiful to be encompassed by any one school of thought or religion. And when you do try to say it is encompassed by that one school of thought or religion, you have limited yourself from the love of God, because God is everything and everyone. And there is no, people ask me, what is your religion? I say, I am John and I am love. I have no other religion other than that. And so, guys, what I'd like you to do is if you got something out of this video, in the comments section, write your own experiences about how a broader perspective has shown you a more loving God, how releasing the doctrines and dogmas of one religion to embrace the stories of all of them have shown you a brighter world, have shown you more beautiful people, have shown you the experiences of life that are much more open to more love in your own life. And I'd love to hear the stories that you have from your life. I'd love to see some stories that demonstrate how beautiful God is in all aspects of life. And my final message is this: all of the texts are a guide, not a cage. And by expanding your perspective, we open ourselves to a greater experience of the divine. We expand and broaden ourselves to look at all of the texts, all of the writings, and even look for it in the movies we watch and in the children we play with. Look at those words that are coming through and listen for those truths, hear those truths. And I want to thank you guys for joining me in this conversation, because it is a conversation. And remember, you're the creator of your spiritual journey. Mom was very, very specific on that. Spirituality is a personal journey. And this is my personal journey. I'm not judging you for yours. Just because I believe differently doesn't mean you're judged. That's an ideology of a religion, to say that because you believe differently, that makes me wrong or whatever. If it works for you, then that's great. Here's my only measure. Are you a loving and caring person, or are you judging and sequestering yourself to a different room because you don't want to be around those other people? You're limiting yourself if you're in the other room. And that's my thought on this. You guys have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon. See you.